Jeff Grimes is now the offensive coordinator for the Kansas Jayhawks. Is that bad news for Baylor? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Quick extra segment today of Locked On Baylor as former Bears offensive coordinator Jeff Grimes is now headed to Lance Leipold's staff in Lawrence to be the OC for the Jayhawks. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Cam Stewart. It's your first listen today and every day, and I really appreciate that. Okay, we're the only place that's giving you Baylor Athletics exclusive content for 5 days a week that's not coming straight from the university. And this news today of Jeff Grimes going to Kansas, I was a little surprised by it because it's just not a name we had heard. I'd heard being the head coach at UTEP, which is his alma mater. He pulled himself out of that race. And then the momentum started to pick up about BYU and a return there with Kalani Sitake, who, as I understand, didn't have a greatest relationship, those two. But it sounded like that's where he might head back to. And instead, it's announced today that he is going to Kansas. And I thought about it for a couple seconds, and I was like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I originally thought, if not BYU, then somewhere in the Big Ten would sound like it would work, with that run-heavy style of offense. The only two teams that really ran the wide zone were Iowa and Baylor as their full offensive philosophy. And so I thought, I was looking for a full-time OC. Maybe that's a match made in heaven. Instead, he sticks in the Midwest, but sticks with the Big 12 as well, and that's Kansas. And honestly, it's not a bad move by Lance Leipold. I mean, this is a team that has had dual threats at quarterback with Jalen Daniels and Jason Bean, and it looks like they're going to have Devin Neal coming back as well, the all Big 12 running back. And they're going to want to run the football on you all day long. And they lose their OC to Penn State, and they have an offensive line coach now, Fuchs, who is a wide zone guy. Scott Fuchs, is a wide zone guy. And that's kind of what Jeff Grimes had with Eric Mateos, kind of taking him under his wing at BYU after coming from Arkansas. And now, of course, Mateos is back at Arkansas. But these are two guys who are on the same page about kind of the RVO, kind of the wide zone. And we have seen it work. It's so easy to point at this year and all the struggles that the team had. But, I've talked about it with him getting jobbed. I mean, it wasn't nearly all his fault. The defense was horrible and wasn't any kind of conducive to Jeff Grimes' style of offense. And a lot of people gave him crap last year. And the offense on paper was just not that bad. It really wasn't. In fact, in 2022, when they go 6-7, they ranked among the top 10 in program history in things like touchdowns, which is the 7th most, and 10th most total yards, and 10th most in first downs. And they had the 4th best single season mark of completion percentage ever at Baylor in 2022. So it's so easy to be like, Blake Shapen missed Ben Sims on that 3rd down against TCU, and so the Jeff Grimes sucked. I'm sick of it. I'm sick of watching him run a to the short side on a toss. Like, just if you just look at the numbers, which are what we all have to look at the end of the day, they're really not bad. And then I think beyond that, people really forget how we turned around this offense in 2021. His first year there, not any of his guys. This is really pre-transfer portal. None of his guys there with a brain-dead offense the year before from Larry Fedora. Instead, Baylor goes from 123rd in the nation to 10th in rushing, 125th in yards per play to 33rd, and of course go from 2-7 to 12-2 and the Big 12 champions. So it's easy to forget because of the struggles that the overall team had this year that Jeff Grimes was absolutely a success at Baylor. Was it time for Baylor to go into a different direction in terms of scheme? Sure. But I just thought it was funny that they have one of the worst defenses in all of college football at 120 or whatever it was in total defense. And they think, okay, we got to keep the head coach, but we've got to get rid of coordinators, but not our defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator. That's the problem. Now, were they great? No, they were like 80th in total offense, but that's way better than the defense, and was not the problem this year. And so, yeah, I mean, good on Kansas. Is he the hottest name on the market? Probably not. But again, amongst these coaches, he is still like the most well-respected of the offensive coordinators. Like even earlier this year, Greg McElroy's graphic of top 10 coordinators who are going to get head coaching jobs, Jeff Grimes was still on it. And he was an absolute hotshot to become a head coach. Even in 2021, when he took the Baylor job, I mean, we were all worried that someone was going to pry him away to be their head coach, especially after that year. So good on Kansas. They are going to run the ball down your throat. They've got the personnel there. They've got a stellar offensive line there, at least they think. That is going to be the key to this offense. And Jeff Grimes is an offensive line guy, but he's got a well-qualified offensive line coach there with Fuchs and not Mateos. And they've got veteran guys there. It sounds like a situation of 2021 at Baylor. They don't need to make as dramatic a jump as that Baylor team needed to make from 2020, but they've got the personnel there to run the ball down your throat and play into exactly what Jeff Grimes wants to do. So good on Jeff. Good for Kansas. I don't know that it makes them like 3 or 4 wins better, but they don't need to be 3 or 4 wins better. They're a good program. Another win or two puts them in the picture for the Big 12 Conference Championship. And Jeff Grimes can absolutely do that. Jeff Grimes and Scott Fuchs can absolutely put that together, I think, just from what we've seen from their track records. So, boy, the wide zone, run it down your throat, Kansas Jayhawks. Not your slightly older brothers, Kansas Jayhawks, baby. And not your slightly older brothers, Big 12. Kansas is for real. They've got threats on the offensive side, and now they have a real experienced offensive coordinator in there to try and put those pieces together and run it down your freaking throat. That's what Kansas is going to do. Now, they do play Baylor this year in Waco. And until Baylor starts getting some portal guys in here on defense, which I'm sure they will, but until we see that, we right now are going off of the same defense that finished 120th this year. And if that is the case, which they were by far the worst team in the conference against the run as well. So if that's still the case, Jeff Grimes and Kansas are going to gash the Baylor Bears. Just left, right, and center, run it down your throat. It's going to look like what Baylor did to North Carolina and the Russell Athletic Bowl back in 2015. They're just going to slam it down your throat. Hard, smash mouth football. And Jeff Grimes, if this defense stays anything like what it is at Baylor this year, going into next year, Jeff Grimes is going to have his revenge big time on the Bears. And it's going to end Baylor's longest winning streak against one opponent, which was, I think, 11 straight against Kansas. That's going to go out the window. Maybe more than that. 13, 14? I don't know. Someone look it up for me. What do you think about this Jeff Grimes hire? I know a lot of you were at your wits' end with Jeff here at Baylor. I was one of the defenders because I look at the numbers. I just read them off again. The offense was not nearly the problem. And Jeff Grimes, as we've heard from some rumors here, did not have full control over what players he wanted to bring in and potentially what players he wanted to start. So that's damning. He will have that kind of control, I'm guessing, at Kansas. And everything Lance Leipold has touched has turned to gold. So I can't imagine this one being any different for a guy who's been coaching for 30 years and has run some pretty damn good offenses, has a national championship ring as an offensive line coach at Auburn with Cam Newton. He was blocking for him. His teams were blocking for him. His players were blocking for him. And a guy who propelled Zach Wilson into becoming the number 2 overall pick in the draft. Good on Kansas. I do like where Baylor's at from an offensive coordinator standpoint as well. I don't know how much difference it's going to make in year one, but I like Spavital. I like his philosophy. So I think both teams are liking who they have at offensive coordinator. But let me know what you think. Is this going to mean he's going to come to Waco, throw his revenge out at us, and throw 45 points on the board without throwing the football? We'll see. We'll see. Do you think that's a good hire? Were you sick of Jeff Grimes? Do you think they should have kept Jeff Grimes? I'd love to hear some of that. I'd love to hear some reasons for it too. Anyway, thank you for joining on another bonus episode. We got to get out of here, but we'll be back tomorrow with some more transfer targets here on Locked On Baylor.